with all due respect.
Hey, we're Josh Ortegon and Greg Gaines, and this is With All Due Respect, the show where we keep it real about health, fitness, and performance. From weight loss to sports development, we're covering the conversations that matter.
Follow us on Instagram at Phenom Fitness, PHNM Fitness, and visit www.phenomfit.com to check out our training programs, coaching, and gear built for real results. Let's get into it.
All right, guys, with all due respect, we are live. And if you watched our last episode, we are on the subject of fertility. And we started off last episode with kind of men's fertility, with our first episode on kind of men's fertility. And I said, guys, I will give as much information as I can on the first episode. After this episode, I'm going to be taking a lot of notes and asking questions. Right? So we have Deidre Bloomquist on. Perfect. I did it right the first time. Deidre Bloomquist. And guys, we've had some conversations on here around like environmental factors and toxicity, but never something as focused as environmental factors, toxicity, and infertility, even children's eczema. We kind of talked about before when we went live. That's the kind of, you're not doing it with kids, but you're also doing it with adults. And Deidre, if someone is listening to this, it's such a niche thing that you do. Can you explain the focus of your practice so the people that are listening can get a good idea of what you do? Because even you admitted it, and I thought, I've never heard of somebody doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I specialize in environmental toxicity, and my practice is Always Growing Wellness, and we specialize in reversing infertility as well as preconception prep around toxicity, but we also have a pediatric practice where we focus on environmental toxins. And for a lot of people, that feels like two completely different markets, but they are intimately connected. So how this kind of all came to be is I have a little boy who's turning 5 soon. I feel like I did everything right as far as gut health. I knew that moms give their babies gut health. And so I was really aware of antibiotics. I was healthy. I was exercising. I used to be a CrossFit trainer. He was born at home. He was breastfed. He's never had any pharmaceuticals. And so thinking about all of that, I was like, he's going to be set up perfectly. And when he was about 9 months old, he started developing eczema. And I was like, what in the world is happening here? What have I done wrong? And what I ended up figuring out is not only did his gut health get impacted, and we can talk about why that happened, but he had actually inherited all of my toxin burden, even though I was completely asymptomatic and super healthy. So he got mold mycotoxins from me, and he got a ton of heavy metals like mercury. And I wish I would have known that I needed to do detoxification work prior to conceiving. And it's something that I talk about with moms and dads all day is they wish they would have known this because of the health impacts that they're seeing for their kids now. So the work that we do in the fertility side is really because we're seeing a lot more complex fertility conditions. There's a huge epidemic of fertility declining in our country, whether it's for men or women, and it's a really complex issue where, couples are getting pushed a certain direction that doesn't work well for everybody. And when we look at the toxin burdens that we've acquired over the course of our lives, often over decades that are being stored in our body, they're impairing our ability to conceive. And when we reverse that, it means that couples who've been told that they will never conceive naturally are able to in our practice. But it also means that they have healthier pregnancies, birth outcomes are better, they're able to breastfeed if they would like to, and their children are healthier. So while we do this from the perspective of we love seeing couples get pregnant, and that's a huge fulfilling win in and of itself, we're really doing this because we want kids to be healthy too. We don't want kids to be unhealthy in the process of trying to fix what's going on with fertility in our country.
When you say that your child, he said he's 5 now,
Mm-hmm.
and at 9 months, these things occurred?
Yep.
I have kind of a two-part question. When you say he didn't have any pharmaceuticals and you felt like you did everything right, what can you explain what you mean by everything right? And then no pharmaceuticals, first part. And then what were you seeing at 9 months? What were the symptoms that you were seeing at 9 months? Because there could be somebody listening to it that say, oh, that's just the normal digestion of my kid. Oh, probably had a little bit too dairy, or I'm a little gassy, or maybe, they say things like that.
Totally.
So two parts of that. What do you mean when you say you felt like you did everything right and that he had no pharmaceuticals? And then what were some signs that you were seeing that led you to be like, all right, there's an issue here?
Yep. So probably prior to him being born, I hadn't personally used any antibiotics for at least 10 years. He's never been given an antibiotic, even though he's had normal childhood things, especially up to that point when he was 9 months old. He's never received any vaccines. We get a lot of feedback from families saying eczema is just a vaccine reaction, which is simply not the case. And then when he started turning 9 months, it was really subtle initially. It started as this really small patch of like dry skin on his shoulder. And I was like, that's really strange. And I actually took him to a naturopathic doctor and they said, oh, it's just a skin membrane issue. Just do some cod liver oil, maybe a probiotic. And it ended up blowing up and going all over his body. So it was basically all the way from his collarbones down to his feet and was very red and angry. And I had seen pediatricians. Pediatricians wanted to do allergy testing. We did allergy testing, came back for no allergies. He wasn't allergic to anything. And, at that point in time, they had said, the next step would be doing something like a topical steroid. And so for me, a topical steroid, I always look at what are the side effects of these things. And so topical steroids for kids have long-term impacts, especially the way that the brain and the adrenals function. So especially for long-term use, because steroids are only indicated for max of 2 weeks, yet people are often using them indefinitely. So really thinking about that, I didn't want to be using anything where we were going to be impairing the way that his body was meant to function. So, at that point in time, I was doing testing on adults and doing stool testing and doing toxin testing and blood chemistry and all of these things, but I never really worked with kids. I never had any intention of working with kids. And I said, you know what, I think I'm going to run the testing on him just to see what comes back. And his pediatrician was like, he's not going to have any gut pathogens. He's 9 months old. There's no way he has any toxicity. His gut health and his testing ended up being one of the worst tests I've ever seen. He probably would have been diagnosed with IBS at a minimum. His calprotectin levels were maxed out at 2,000. They're the highest I've ever seen come back on testing. He had not only huge bacterial overgrowth, he had parasitic overgrowth. We saw parasites come out in his stool. He had mold and metals, even though he'd never been exposed to any of those things in our homes or during the course of his life. So once I started seeing those things get really bad, was like, well, now I can put a protocol in place. And what ended up happening is I put him on a protocol for a month and his eczema went away and it's never come back.
Hey, Gray, you know who has a story like this? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember the
Yeah.
exact story.
Yeah.
We had a friend on previously. It sounds very similar.
Yeah, we had a friend, Nurse Kate Johnson, who's on social, and she has almost a very similar story to this
with her son.
with her son, and it's what concerns me the most about these things is you know what you're doing, you know the signs. You're a professional who does this for a living. Normal mom and dad who are teachers and doctor or lawyers and all different they don't know. Right? And you're a trained professional. You work in functional nutritional medicine.
Yep. And I still fell into this trap.
And you still, yeah, that's the thing that concerns. That's the things I'm like, those are the things I'm seeing. I'm like, well, what about normal everyday people?
Yes.
Who see this and all of a sudden, they get caught in the whirlwind of Western medicine. And now who knows where your son would have been down if this was, a normal person that goes, I'm just going to take my doctor to the pediatrician.
Yep, absolutely. And that's ultimately a lot of the kids that we see day in and day out. They've been battling this for their entire lives, oftentimes for years and years. And the crazy part is that we can turn it around and get these kids clear within a matter of months. Wow. So it's just a matter of having the right tools, having the right data. And one of the things that we see so often is that kids aren't being exposed to these things. Sometimes they are living in homes that have mold, of course, and then we're testing them, we have that conversation, they find it, and we resolve those issues. But what's happening more and more is that we're having kids who are otherwise healthy, should not have these things happening in their lives. And it's because they're inheriting it from mom. All of these things get transferred in utero. Things like mold mycotoxins can be transferred via breast milk. So we're adding to toxin load, even when we're doing something really good to nourish children as well. And so there's just all of these ways that these kids kind of start day one of life in an already extremely inflamed state that then impacts their gut health and their immune system and the way that their brains function. So, our big mission is, we can help fix these kids on the backside of things. But if we got ahead of it from a prevention perspective and toxin testing was standard of care when it comes to preconception work, we prevent all that pain for families down the road.
I imagine it was very hard for you as a mom who goes, I feel like I've done everything right and my son has to. Like, were you a little hard on yourself, you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think this happens a lot too. Like I felt like I had failed in everything. It was like I did all this hard work for what, And I've really just been able to turn that around and really relate back to parents who have done the exact same thing of like, it's okay. I wish I would have known this. And this is why I'm trying to get this message out to say, I wish I would have known. If I could go back in time and know what I know now, I would definitely do things differently. And we can catch people at that point that they're in right now.
I want to touch on something you said that was subtle, but someone could hear it, and I want to say this in a way that's so not controversial or political at all. Like I can't tell you how far I want to stay away from that. You said he had had no vaccines. Okay. Can you explain no, zero, none, nothing on the protocol, or you limited the protocol, or you just had conversations and adjusted the schedule, or you weren't even a part of the schedule?
We're not a part of the schedule.
Okay, that's right.
And what I will say too is like we do see a lot of people who fall everywhere on that spectrum of things too.
Good for you. That's awesome.
People have done none, people have done all of them, people who have a spread out schedule, it does not matter to us. I truly feel like having informed consent around that and understanding when it makes sense for your child or for you if you're pregnant or thinking about these things is really important. And I think there are circumstances where it doesn't make sense right now, for instance. So with seeing a lot of kids with eczema and things going on from an immune health perspective, their immune system, the goal with vaccination is to elicit an immune response. If we're doing that at a time where the immune system is already dysregulated, they are much more likely to have an adverse reaction, which we do often see happen. So just really thinking about like what's happening with gut health, it should be a bio-individual approach. There are a lot of different factors that go into that type of decision. And just knowing my health history and my husband's health history, anytime you're, combining genetics, thinking about what's going to make the most sense here. Now, I will say in retrospect, I'm very glad that we hadn't at that point in time because I didn't realize he had all of this stuff going on and he might have had something really scary happen if we had because of those things that came down the pipeline later on.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about where you could have been somewhere further down the line.
When you talk about his protocol, what does a protocol look like for a child or even for a woman?
Yeah, so they're very similar. So anytime we're putting protocols together, they're going to include diet recommendations, lifestyle support. So really thinking about what are the rhythms of your day? How frequently are we eating? Are we doing any lymph drainage? Are we moving our body? What does that look like? Is it too much or is it too little? Then thinking about even things like castor oil packs, coffee enemas. There's so much that we can do just depending on the person and their comfortability to support detoxification as a whole. And then with the last piece, which tends to be the most impactful, is supplementation. And this is true for both kids and adults. So with kids, the dosage is very different than it is with adults. But when we put together protocols, depending on what we're looking at, we're really thinking about foundations. So this is going to be more nutrient and mineral based, supporting drainage and detox pathways. So that's usually going to be kidney and liver function, but then also looking at any systems that need support in the body. So there's a number that really relate to fertility, but they also relate to kids. Like, everyone needs to be having a bowel movement on a daily basis, at least one. If that's not happening, everything kind of recirculates and gets backed up. So this is really important from a toxin perspective, but also a hormonal perspective, because we often forget that hormones are endogenous toxins. So when they build up, they cause toxicity in the body. But then we're really thinking about rebalancing the gut, and we're doing this with herbs in particular. So we can do this whether it's a bacterial issue, a parasitic issue, or a fungal issue. We're always thinking about hand selecting binders, which is really important. And we're talking about toxin burden in the body as well. Not all toxins are bound by the same things. So for instance, if we're thinking about mycotoxins, which are the poisonous substance that mold produces, many of them are bound by things like activated charcoal. Not all of them are, though. So when we're thinking about testing, that's where it's really important, where we can know exactly what type of mycotoxins are circulating through the system so that you have a very strategic approach to actually removing and eliminating them so that they're not causing stress to tissues throughout the body.
Would you say that the most common when you see is mold? I know a lot of your conversation, your content is about mold. Would you say that that's the most common thing that you see, or one that you personally relate to the most?
Yeah, so I think it's the most common thing that we see. I would probably say 90% of the people that we see as a whole do have some level of mold toxicity. And the issue with mold is it's very complex. So it can be a current exposure where you have something in your home where there's a water damage event, maybe there's mold. It can be actively producing mycotoxins, or even dead mold is dangerous in homes. But there's also food-based mycotoxins. So grains in particular, even your healthy grains, oats, rice, quinoa, those things are going to carry mycotoxins in them. Even things like coffee beans can carry mycotoxins. All of that adds to burden in the body that can create fungal issues. So it's not always a current exposure. It can also be a past exposure. So for instance, when we're seeing kids, they've never actually been exposed to mold. They inherited that mold and mycotoxin burden from mom. But we see a lot of women in the fertility space where maybe they used to live in an apartment, where they were in college or in childhood, or where they used to live with their partner, where there was a mold issue. They've since moved out. But what happens when we're exposed to mold, we inhale the spores of mold, which is essentially the seed, so it can continue to reproduce. When we inhale those spores, they then colonize the body and begin to live in our body. So they can live in our sinuses, our lungs, and our GI tract. When that happens, they're going to continue to produce those mycotoxins from the inside out, so our body becomes the moldy building, even if we've left it. And the reason that I really focus on mold is I think it's super common. People are often missing it and not testing it, but it can impact a lot of different systems in the body. It'll impact your immune system. The immune system is incredibly important for anybody who's experienced a miscarriage, especially recurrent miscarriages. Having a loss, depending on where you're at, especially that 6 to 10 week mark, is very indicative of an immune system issue. It's also going to impact the gut. It changes the way that the gut functions. So you can have constipation or diarrhea, but you're also going to have fungal issues in the gut. Those are then going to cause bacterial issues and parasitic overgrowth as well. It changes the way that the brain functions and is able to communicate with your ovaries and even the testes as well. So it impacts both sexes at the end of the day. So like there's a certain mycotoxin called zearalenone. It is from grains in particular. And what it is a non-steroidal estrogenic mycotoxin, meaning that your brain perceives it as estrogen. So you might feel like you have estrogen dominance as a woman, and you actually have a mold issue that your brain thinks is a estrogen issue, and so it actually downregulates your own endogenously produced estrogen, meaning you're going to have trouble producing eggs and follicles to ovulate. For men, it then increases estrogen levels, so you feel like testosterone is low. Has nothing to do with your hormones. It's your body's way of compensating and trying to recalibrate as a result of this mold exposure. So mold is a big one, and we're certainly thinking about endocrine disrupting chemicals, things like pesticides, plastics, all of those play a really important role. But the third category that people often miss is heavy metals. Heavy metals are something that we are coming in contact with every day, everybody. One of the most common sources is the tap water that we're often drinking. So we really want to be thinking about water quality, how we're coming in contact with those. Even things like dental fillings can contain metal and create toxicity in the body, and they change immune signaling. So while we do see a lot of heavy metal and chemical burden, we're always having conversations with people about where is this exposure coming from? How can we reduce the exposure? Knowing that the goal is not necessarily get down to 0 exposures in our life, because that's unrealistic and it's stressful for people to think about that. but really thinking about what are the key players that are causing disruption in the body so that we can address those as our primary focus.
When you talk about grains, can you expand on that a little bit? Because I don't want anybody to be like, oh, I'm scared to eat grains now
Totally.
because of the mold, toxicity levels.
Totally. So when I'm thinking about grains, it can be any sort of grains. And part of the problem with grains is that they are harvested quickly, they have moisture, and they are stored in dark facilities. Even in our cabinets, right? They're dark in there. So that is one thing to think about. We're really thinking about high quality as much as possible. And then the other thing that I'm always talking with clients about is the goal is not to be afraid of mold. We're all going to come in contact with mold. It's a very normal and natural thing. In nature, things like sunshine and fresh air keep mold in check. But in our modern environments, we often don't have a lot of exposure to those things. So when we're thinking about mold, at some point we're going to eat some grains that have some, or we're going to go to a hotel, or we're going to move into a house that's going to have mold. And what we really want to be thinking about is how do we support natural detoxification processes in our body and make those part of our lifestyle. So that's having regular bowel movements. How are we moving our body in order to move lymph systems throughout the body? Does the immune system have the capacity to deal with things, or are we constantly getting sick? Are we eating things like adequate protein in order to fuel things like white blood cells, which are reliant on protein in order to function optimally? So there's so many different ways that we can really be thinking about what makes sense for each person individually when we're looking at blood chemistry and their prior toxin exposure, so that we can make sure that when they do inevitably come in contact with something, they can withstand that. So I totally agree. I don't think anybody needs to be fearful of grains. And I bring up the grains, especially when we think about rice, because what we often see is we see a lot of really healthy people who are not eating a whole ton of gluten. They're not eating bread and pastries and sweets. And they're like, where is this coming from? Why do I still have issues? All grains are susceptible to these types of things.
So one of your practices isn't just let's try to avoid all this. Let's build our body strong enough to become more resilient to it.
Exactly.
We've had conversations here around stress. I have a client I work with right now that had one cardiovascular biomarker kind of pop up, and he started developing stress of like, am I going to have a heart attack? Is this going to be bad? And it's the only one. Every other marker was phenomenal, except one genetic factor, and it caused stress in him. And I'm like, hey, buddy, you're going to give yourself high blood. You're going to give yourself all these things by really having stress over this and anxiety over this. And I said, I'm not gonna like make fun. I'm not gonna like, what is the word I'm looking for? I guess I'm not gonna gaslight you by saying, oh, just have less. I feel like it's hard to tell people just don't have stress.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like it's like, oh, you need to find a way to manage your stress. Instead, when we talk to people, we talk to them about how to become more stress resilient. And it sounds like you're talking to your clients around like, hey, you're never going to get down to square zero, but we can do some things to make you more resilient to the environment factors that you're going to see and it be exposed to. That's what we want, right? We want you to be more resilient to it. I'm 49. My mother has not drank tap water or unfiltered water since I was early 13, 14. And we used to make fun of her.
She's way ahead of the curve.
We used to make fun of her 35 years ago for making fun of my mother for not drinking tap water, only had unfiltered water in the home, bottled water. Still to this day, she doesn't. She drinks regular, even to the point she doesn't cool her water. Everything she drinks is is a room temperature water.
Yeah.
And I go back to like making fun of her when I was like 13 years old for it. And now to this day, I'm like, man, my mom was way ahead of her time.
Yeah, for sure.
With the tap water.
Well, and you know what, I think a lot of people do realize that, there's heavy metals in tap water. We know that there's things like NSAIDs and antidepressants, but there's also birth control and there's also Plan B. So I often call tap water infertility water. This is really big. there's also a lot of people throughout the country that are being exposed to radioactive substances like radium and uranium in their water. So it's this added layer of we really need to be thinking about what's happening, not only from what we're being exposed to, but then how is our body really handling it? Because we'll often find that people who live in the same household are being exposed to the same things, but having two completely different symptom presentations. One might be really healthy and one is totally deteriorating. And the question becomes why? And just thinking about who they are as a person and how we support them so that it's not overwhelming, but we can get them back to baseline.
I've followed Dr. Zach Bush for a while, and I really like his story. It's really fun to see people who started their whole life wanting to help people in regular medicine and Western medicine. And then as they got further down, they're like, oh, we're not helping people. I might be part of the problem, and completely reverse their course. And I was watching some content he was putting out where something like 90% of the glyphosate that hits the ground hits our tap water. And that was scary to me. That was one of those things where I was like, oh, this is concerning for me. If 90% of that is into the water, and then, that's a rabbit hole you can go down, and all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and, at 3 o'clock in the morning, you haven't slept, and, you're going through your house and calling your neighbors to find out who's spraying their pesticides on, right? Do you spend a lot of time with your people delivering news to them, but also, hey, we're going to work on this. Please don't go Google.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
We do tell them not to do that. So, for instance, when we're looking at toxin testing, we look at the test together. I try not to release testing to people before we have a chance to go through it, because Google will just tell you everything's killing you, and this is certainly the problem. And oftentimes when we can go through and say, these are really high priority items here that we do need to address, figure out if there's a source, what it can be doing to your body, but then also really connect it to how is your body actually responding to those things is really grounding for people. And I think toxins right now are having a moment as a whole where people are thinking about environmental toxicity, but it's really overwhelming for a lot of people too. It just feels like everything's killing me, so I should just not care at all. And I don't think it's not that we shouldn't care at all. And one of the things that we've really done to be mindful of this is, last year I published my book, Toxic Infertility, and we talk about a lot of toxins, but I wanted to do it in a way where it's like, hey, I don't want this to stress you out, but you also do need to understand that this is very important because of the total load that we are all coming in contact with. And it's a really delicate balance, ultimately. So I really do think that that's where testing can be so helpful for people to decide, where do I actually need to spend my time versus throwing everything out of their house and feeling like they have to replace everything, and knowing how to make steps strategically over time that are going to be most impactful, or do it in a really strategic way, even if it's like, as you run out of things, you're replacing things. A lot of people are always like, there's no way that you're exposed to any toxins because this is what you do for a living. No way. Of course I am. Like, I'm human. I go out to drink. Guess what? I'm going to drink tap water while we're there, probably. Mold things happen in homes on a regular basis. We live in homes where water exists indoors around organic material. It creates a potential risk factor. So things can always happen there, and we don't always eat organic, especially when we're traveling, right? Like, we eat organic when we're at home, but those things are not always as easily accessible or when you're eating out. So I think it's one of those things where you just have to understand the risks and the burdens that you're facing and how your body is really withstanding those types of burdens so that you can make changes that just make sense for you, even if it's not perfect, because I don't think that perfection is the goal.
I can definitely see that. When a couple is coming to you, and I do feel like I kind of mentioned this before, infertility, culturally, historically, has really been a subject around women, where there are cultures that if a couple can't get pregnant, the woman's almost a little bit shunned. And the man is kind of like, well, something's wrong with her, right? I think we're way past that, or at least I guess I am. I don't know. I guess we've had this conversation. And if a couple's coming to you and they're like, "Hey, we're in the beginning of this process." Maybe they've had friends that have struggled. Maybe they've struggled before, or their family struggled, or their mom and dad struggled to get pregnant. And they start talking to you and they say, "We don't know we're going to have a problem. We don't think we're going to have a problem, but let's get ahead of this."
Yep.
Where do you start? What are the small hinges that swing big doors? Do you start with blood work in both of them? And what are things that they could leave maybe that first day with you that they can go home and talk about as a couple of, "Hey, these are the changes we're going to make as a family today." What would that conversation look like?
Yeah. And we do see a lot of really healthy people too who don't expect there to be anything coming down the pipeline as far as fertility struggles goes. So I do think that having comprehensive blood work that is looked at through a functional lens is incredibly important. It needs to be comprehensive in that it's going to be more than a comprehensive metabolic panel and a CBC with differential. Those are important. They tell us about liver and kidney function, electrolytes, and then immune function in the body, as well as red blood cell health. But there's so much more that we can do at a really affordable cost to look at what's happening from a systemic level in the body. So having a good look at things like vitamin D, homocysteine, which is going to tell us about methylation, but also inflammation, looking at CRP markers, looking at a full iron panel. We screen both men and women for full thyroid panels, which are going to include your TSH, but total and free T3 and T4, as well as antibodies. So we're screening for any autoimmune conditions because those are huge. We also do a number of different minerals like magnesium, copper, and zinc, because these are really critical for both men and women when it comes to fertility. And lipids as well. That tells us a lot about what's happening in the body and how we're chemically digesting our food, what's happening with gut health and our overall immune system. How are our detox organs working? Are there any key nutrient deficiencies? We know that the thyroid is very important for metabolic factors. And then the last thing that we're going to look at, which we'll talk about, is blood sugar management. So not only looking at things like A1C and fasting glucose, but also insulin and LDH, which tells us more about if we're eating frequently enough, which is more of an issue typically for women. So that tells us what's happening, and it often gives us clues about, does it make sense to do something like toxin testing? Are there some signs here that your liver's struggling, your immune system is either completely tanked and compromised or upregulated, and in response to what? So we can really get a good idea of where do we need to focus on efforts. For most people, there's a couple of things that are really important no matter where we're starting, whether we're thinking there's been a mold exposure or we're just like, I feel great, just want to make sure that things are in a good spot. Sleep is huge. Sleep quality and circadian rhythm are something that we talk about constantly, because it's not only going to be supporting melatonin production so that we're getting that antioxidant support, because we often forget that melatonin isn't just for sleep. It does antioxidant duties in the body as well. But sleep is important for mitochondria. Mitochondria produce ATP. So we usually all remember from school, it's that powerhouse of the cell. But mitochondria are also very important when we think about egg and sperm health as well. So for instance, eggs have about 100,000 mitochondria, whereas other cells in the body have somewhere between 1 and 10,000. They are hugely energetically dependent. The same is true for sperm. So if mitochondria are being impaired because we're not getting good sleep and we're not getting deep sleep, it makes it very difficult to have healthy eggs and sperm. Same thing is going to apply to things like blood sugar. So having a good look at what you're seeing on blood chemistry can be helpful from a blood sugar balance perspective. But blood sugar dysregulation is going to impact all hypothalamic pituitary function, meaning it's going to impact the way the adrenals function, it's going to impact ovaries and testes, it's going to be impacting the thyroid. So if you think you have a hormonal issue and you haven't considered blood sugar balance as foundational, that's a really good starting point. So thinking about balancing our meals, eating frequently enough. It's also going to be impairing things like ovulation and progesterone production and implantation if blood sugar is all over the place. As much as we can, thinking about reducing toxin load is important. So, I think it used to be, and it's changing a little bit, that couples would get pregnant, and the day they found out they were pregnant, they start going through all their personal care items and throwing things out. What if we started that earlier on, like 6 to 12 months ahead of time, or at the point where they said, hey, we want to be parents? So one of the things that I always think about is couples become parents, the day they decide they want to be. They don't become parents the day they get a positive pregnancy test. They don't become parents the day the child is born. Let's start making these changes for healthier kids earlier on, whether that's changing our water quality, throwing out plastics, getting rid of fragrance in our personal care items, thinking about switching to quality foods where we can, right? And I get food costs are insanely high right now, so that's a bigger ask for people, but really thinking about where can we have the most impact for this. And really just thinking about nutrient density as a whole. A lot of people don't realize that even if we're eating whole foods, we're probably still going to be deficient in a number of different nutrients. B vitamins are one of the big ones. At least 50% of the population has MTHFR gene variations, meaning that they're not converting B vitamins, even if they're getting enough through their diet, into a form where our cells can use it. So we're going to be deficient. We're also low in a lot of minerals like magnesium and copper and zinc. And a lot of this comes from the fact that we just aren't eating foods in the way that we really evolved to. So really thinking about eating organ meats, for instance, eating nose to tail can be incredibly helpful so that we're getting all of those nutrients that the animals are providing for us in a really potent form so that we can have these as we think about fertility. So, a lot of people often call organ meats nature's multivitamin. They're also nature's prenatal. So we really want to be thinking about incorporating those things where we can.
A few things that seem to be common across all of our conversations that we've had. And it's reaffirming. I hope people watch this and watch other episodes and listen to you. Blood sugar balance has been so common in almost every conversation we've had. Sleep has been common in every conversation we've had. Gray, would you say that those two have been the importance of balancing blood sugar? Oh,
Yeah.
and the third one, inflammation.
I knew you were going to go there. Yeah. Those are the top three things that we always, because I think outside of 90% of people know that they need to move and they need to eat well. That same 90%, probably 80% of them don't realize the benefits of getting good deep sleep, how things are making them inflamed, and why they feel like they're having all of these energy dips throughout the day. It's just not as talked about, but we're finding the importance of them in every single conversation we're having.
Every conversation. I don't care if it's hormones, weight loss, performance. Now you're talking about fertility.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of all of that. It just seems like everything's coming down to a lot of those three main prime movers.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the way I think about fertility as a whole is fertility is the pinnacle of health. And I know it's very easy for people to feel like I need to skip, levels 1 through 3 and go to the really advanced stuff and do these really intense protocols or think about is there something really wrong with my body? But if we don't have these basics in place, we don't have anything to build upon. So I think it's really easy for us to skip the really free stuff at the end of the day in an effort to be I want to kind of shortcut this, but they're going to be really important, not only when we're thinking about fertility, but then the same things come up when we're doing pregnancy care and when we're doing children's care as well. Those are important for everybody.
The transition from healthy mom, healthy dad to healthy baby. I just think your story in the very beginning talks how important that is and how many things are transferred from the mom and dad to the child.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, what'd you say? The heavy metals were one of the ones that were transitioned over?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you said?
Heavy metals and mold are the top two.
Heavy metals and mold. And I do think there is sort of a conversation where they're well, that's more dependent on the mom because the mom's carrying the baby. Mom has the placenta. The mom's giving birth to it. The guy just thinks, hey, I had a really fun night. We got pregnant. I'm out.
Totally.
Right? Can you tell me, this is for my own education. I want to hear that the reason my kid's going to have 160 IQ is because his daddy had 160 IQ sperm. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
I want to hear that he's going to be 6'5" and dunk on everybody when he's 13 because the dad is 5'10". That's, I mean, if you want to tell me that, you can. But can you still the role of the healthy sperm in this conversation? Because I do feel like everybody's like, oh, this is on the mom now. And
Mm-mm.
the dad's like, we're freewheeling, it's on us, and it's not up
Yep.
to me, or maybe even his health choices that he made
Yes.
going into that. You know, common sense tells me if dad's smoking cigarettes, chugging a six pack every night, they're trying to have, conceive a child, that there's some dads out there that are like, "Pff, all I got to do is have sex.
Yep. It's way, way more.
I want you to kill that myth.
Okay. Yeah, it really does take two. And I think that a lot of men and even women just don't realize this. So I do agree. I think the tides are changing where we're understanding that it takes two and both partners need to be healthy. So the first thing to understand is that the current parameters for measuring sperm quality are drastically different today than they used to be. Over the past 50 years, the parameters for sperm have declined 50%. So what used to be considered as poor sperm quality are now considered normal. And what's changed is the regulatory agencies have essentially moved the markers down to say everyone falls here, but we're not asking why is that happening in the first place. So we don't often realize that one, the sperm literally becomes the embryo. This is huge when we think about the way that genetics are being expressed for babies. So they play a huge role. Sperm health is also going to create the conditions for pregnancy. So if there is some level of sperm health decline, this can actually be contributing to miscarriages. It can also contribute to pregnancy health conditions like preeclampsia and preterm birth. So it's very important that we're thinking about this. So for instance, one of the big things that often kind of gets written off, we see couples all the time where they say, I went to a fertility clinic, I'm here to talk to you and get another opinion. And I ask, have you guys done a semen analysis? And they'll say, yep, everything came back good, but like morphology was just a little bit low. People don't realize what these words mean at the end of the day. So morphology, for instance, above 4% is considered normal by conventional standards. From a functional perspective, I would like to see that much, much higher, but I really want it to be above 10% minimum. What that means is that 4% of sperm are normal. The rest are abnormal. So that means that from a conventional fertility perspective, we're saying that you can have 96% abnormally shaped and designed sperm, and we're still going to say this is normal and there's no problem here. The issue with morphology, this is just the shape. Motility is going to be more of like what's the energetic demand that these sperm have. So thinking about how they're able to travel, which becomes a mitochondrial issue because that's an energy production issue. Why is that morphology? Why are these sperm being abnormally shaped? There's a number of different things that do that. From a blood sugar perspective, even subclinical hypothyroidism can be contributing. Of course, toxin burden can do this as well. So it's not only things like mold and metals, but it's also going to be plastics. Endocrine disruptors are much more impactful for men than they are for women, I would say. And there's a lot of research coming out. There's a woman named Dr. Shauna Swan. She's done a lot of research saying that if we make no change to what men are doing, we will see sperm come down to zero by the year 2045. So this is not our kids' lifetime. This is our lifetime that we will see this happen if we don't start asking questions about why. So it's really important, I think, that we're thinking about both couples and then how things are interacting between the two. So for instance, there was a couple that we saw, and yes, the female had some health concerns going on that we discovered, but they had done a semen analysis for the male partner. Everything came back fine. Well, when we did blood chemistry, because they don't do this as part of routine fertility testing in any way, shape, or form, he was actually diabetic, and nobody had ever done blood work to find out. He needed insulin very, very badly, and nobody asked why. Now, yes, he was overweight. He was not moving his body or eating well the way he should be. So there was some really low-hanging fruit there. But oftentimes what I see is fertility clinics are missing these obvious issues. They're going to be impacting sperm health because we're really, putting blinders on and saying we're only looking at the ovaries and uterus, or we're only looking at the sperm, where fertility is this whole body issue, and we really need to be taking into account everything for somebody.
How do you miss
That's terrifying.
Does he can't feel great, right? He's got to feel bad. He's got to feel bad, right?
Yep.
Do people just get kind of used to feeling horrible and they think that's their baseline?
Yeah, I think so. I do think that people just don't understand what feeling good in your body can actually feel like. And they think it's just like, I don't get enough sleep, or I'm stressed at work, or I'm just exhausted, or whatever it is. And I think, unfortunately, this is a big problem from a conventional fertility perspective is if people can't get pregnant, they basically have two options. You can do IUI or you can do IVF. And we're shuttling people down these paths that might not make sense for them, right? They don't have great success rates, for one thing. And when we actually look at different things of these are really easy things. How can we manage your blood sugar more appropriately? How can we be thinking about food quality, getting people hydrated, like really easy things that are going to improve health as a whole to try and prevent the need for those types of interventions.
So, we did IUI, and when we went in to go do the IUI procedure, she was pregnant.
Awesome.
So yeah, it was one of those things so I was 40 when my child was born. So I was a little bit older. So I'm not surprised we had some issues. Um, uh, my wife at the time had inconsistent cycles and was a pretty low body fat.
Mhm.
And from my understanding, low body fat, production, having a baby. So we were like, hey, it's not working. We did everything. Um, we went to go get the IUI and go through the process, and she was pregnant at the time. So I was like, oh, sweet, we did it, right? Um, but we were having the conversation of like, okay, it's been 6 months. What do we do? And we would probably be considered high-end healthy people.
Mhm.
They did say because of my age, and we did the sperm testing, that it wasn't like, hey, it's not great, you're 40, like moving on. But we were pretty darn healthy people, right?
Yep.
And we were going to start having that conversation of what's this look like, right? Um, and I was at the time, I did, you know, logic tells me it takes two. Logic does, right? I got legit, like I was like, well, this could be me, it could be both. Either way, you're both in it together, right? Like I think the worst thing is to be around, look at the person next to you and be like, this is on you. I'm healthy, right? You
Yes.
better roll. You better, we have a friend that said, my dead body is your dead body. Like, like, like if we're killing somebody, we're killing somebody. Like
Yep.
when you're married and you're going through this process.
Yep.
How do you, this has to be a legitimate conversation. How do you merge what you do with Western medicine?
Hmm.
We struggle with that in our industry, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because, you mentioned something where the numbers have changed for sperm count or sperm quality. We've had people on that talked about over the time how cholesterol numbers have moved lower, basically, so they can prescribe you medicine if your cholesterol is lower. They can't prescribe you if it's 350. So if they change the norm, change the blood
Yep.
pressure, and they just recently changed the blood pressure norm. I don't know if you knew that.
Hmm.
Um, just because if you're outside a certain area, they can prescribe you medicine, right? People are going to come to you and they're going to say, all right, we're going to come to you, but we're also going to go to a doctor.
Yep.
I'm on board with that. I think you just like we talked about earlier, we talked about vaccines. I want you to ask as many questions as you can when it comes to vaccines. I don't I get nervous when you can't ask questions. But why can't I ask like why am I kicked out of the practice for asking questions? That's what concerns me. But I want you to go talk to doctors and talk to me and for you if you're about to get pregnant. I want all those people. I want you to get as much information to make the best decision for you personally, you and your spouse. Some doctors are going to understand what you do.
Hmm.
Some doctors are going to be like, she's a waste of time. Oh, it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with heavy metals. That's just crazy talk,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
I promise you fight that. And I promise it's frustrating at times.
Yep. Absolutely.
How do you
Um,
manage the two?
yeah, like you said, I think it's really important that people understand what their options are. So we do a lot of education that people aren't getting elsewhere. I want to talk to you about IUIs, so we're going to get into this. But a lot of people just aren't getting like the full depth of information. They're being told, this is your option, tell me yes or no. And it's kind of a rushed process oftentimes. And so one of the big things that we get to do is really act as a liaison for people to say, have your conversation with your doctor, come to us. We're going to talk about pros and cons. We're not trying to influence people in any way, shape, or form. So for instance, we'll have people who are in the process of IVF. They've done several rounds. They come work with us and they're like, I want to continue to do IVF. I've already done all this work, invested all this time and money, but I want to prepare for that. So how do we do that? And we can work with them to do that. But I think it's often a matter of making sure that they have the information. So for instance, I recently had a conversation with a woman who came in and she said, I think we're going to do IUI soon, and I want to try the IUI before we sign up to work with you guys. Totally fine. I'm on your timeline. However, let me just talk to you about IUI real quick. So first of all, IUI success rates are incredibly low. They're somewhere between 5 and 10% success rates per cycle. So they often don't tell you that. And if you're over 35, it drops to 2 to 4%, which is a very low percentage for what you pay for IUI. So it's typically somewhere between like $1,000 and $5,000 typically. It's a big price check for a very small amount. The other thing to understand with IUI is it doesn't actually improve anything. It just changes the logistics of how a sperm and egg might meet. We're not impacting egg quality, sperm quality, implantation environment, hormones, inflammation, any metabolic markers, or any of the other stuff that we might be thinking about. So really what's happening with IUI is we're taking the sperm closer to the egg, but we're not figuring out why there might be a fertilization issue. And oftentimes it completely misses the factors that we're just not testing for. Is there oxidative stress? Are the mitochondria in both of these cells functioning optimally? Is there a thyroid issue? Is there anything like DNA fragmentation? Is there an immune activation issue? Is there low progesterone? We're kind of missing all of that as a stepping stone in what I often refer to as this fertility pipeline. If we can't get pregnant naturally, let's try IUI. If that doesn't work for 1 to 3 rounds, then we say, didn't work. Now it's time to do IVF, but we're not really assessing anything. So the big thing I think that people often don't realize when it comes to IVF or IUI is like we're kind of forcing something to occur, but we're not asking, why can't this occur in the first place? And we're bypassing these issues, even though there's more and more research coming out showing that children born via IVF have metabolic conditions that are lifelong. They have differences in birth weight. They have different growth rates. There's a lot of potentially negative impacts from more and more of our population going through IVF rather than just asking, why can't this happen? And I never want to take away or demonize IVF because it's absolutely important for a lot of people. And sometimes those risks are totally worth the reward, and that's okay. But really thinking about, does this make sense for people? So a lot of times we'll see couples who have gone through multiple rounds of IVF come in, have a huge toxin burden, we address it, and they get pregnant naturally, even though they were told that's never going to happen for you. The same thing happens with women. We see a lot of women who have low AMH. AMH is often framed as how many eggs you have left, but really it tells us about the ability to be stimulated by the drugs in IVF. So oftentimes women will come in with low AMH, even if it's for their age. We see a lot of couples who are over the age of 40. It's probably our biggest demographic. And they're told, you're never going to get pregnant naturally. You have to do IVF. IVF can often make things worse. We just had a couple get pregnant who was told that. They were sitting in the IVF office and they're like, this just doesn't feel right. What do you mean I can't get pregnant? They came in, they did 6 months of work with us, and now they're pregnant. And they were told that was never going to happen.
Has anybody ever named their child Deidre? Because I'm almost here's me and Gray always laugh and and my wife says the same thing about me. I'm always the emotional one. You're telling me stories of I'm almost emotional because I'm like, can you imagine being told sorry? Can't do it. And doctors sometimes become very numb to this. We work a lot with we've had tons of people come on and talk about injury prevention and girls and ACLs, and one of my thing is doctors completely have no bedside manner because they'll walk into a 15-year-old girl who plays soccer, who loves it, it's her whole life, and be like, hey, ACL's torn, you're having surgery next week, you'll be out for a year, and then he goes to the next office. Meanwhile, this girl's in shambles, right?
Yeah.
This girl's on the floor with her mom going what? Right? And I'm not saying all doctors are like that. There's some that are like that, right? But I mean, I imagine that some doctors are like, hey, probably going to have a 1% We'll give you some options. We'll give you a pamphlet at the front door, and we'll bill your insurance. And then they go to the next one. And man, that's devastating for people to hear. I mean, you hear people about relationships ending because they can't have children,
Yep.
Mhm.
right? You hear that, right? Um, and that's why I kind of make the joke, but I'm just like, man, if this was me and my wife, and we were going to go down this route, and we couldn't do it, and I would have 3 children and name them all Deidre, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, I would be, I'd just, I'd be like George Foreman, who named all his kids George. That's how I would be. And we got very lucky, it sounds like, that we were able to get pregnant before the IUI. But like, we didn't know this. This was 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
We didn't know. We just thought we're healthy people, and you have sex and you have a baby, right? That's what I was told in sex ed class when I was seventh grade, right? Um, there was no doubt that if I knew somebody like you existed, that I would have had conversations with you prior to be like, hey, set us up for success. What are we doing?
Mhm.
And here's the most amazing part of getting pregnant. I was on TRT at the time, came
Mm.
off the TRT, which sucked as a
Yep.
dude, right? Which was totally check your ego at the door for me as a 39-year-old male. Went through all the processes of reversing that, and we still got pregnant, right? And we've talked about, like, I have tons of kids that come to me and they're like, I'm 27 years old and I got low T. I'm getting on TRT. I'm like, pump the brakes, dude. You got a girlfriend that wants to marry you, and she might not want to marry you if, like, she wants kids. I can already tell, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
Um, but this, I'm a little bit overwhelmed with, like, all of this that goes into this. And I do see people posting all the time, and conversations around the birth rate dropping, and the birth rate's an issue, and they want you to go out and have 5 kids tomorrow. And I'm just like, I have one child. I always make the joke that we have two, me and her, and one kid. Um, if we have one more kid, we'd be playing man-to-man defense. I was never good at man-to-man defense. I was always better at the trap. That we could just trap them in the corner. You got one right now. And if we go to 3 kids, you're playing a zone. Not going to do it, right? So I always kind of made that joke, right? Having more kids. Um, uh, but I was in the health industry. I've been in the health industry my whole life. Um, I always just thought, because I wasn't overweight and I worked out and I ate healthy and I got enough protein, um, you know, I never worried about toxicity and having kids. I never worried about toxicity and stuff. And really, it's probably been in the last, since I met Greg, 2019, 2020, that I've started to be like, hmm. And what really got me into it was brain health,
Mm-hmm.
because the body's healthy, and the people in my family tend to lose the mental side before the body side, right? Which, I don't know what's worse, if you've ever experienced family members where the body goes before the brain or the brain goes before the body. Both are very hard to watch, but the toxicity and the environmental side and the was really for me to start protecting my brain. I wanted to protect my
Mhm.
brain. Um, Gray, you got a lot of work to do.
Well, I mean that's exactly like where this stemmed from. It's not like my super big need to get pregnant right this moment, but I started asking more questions around like, why are my friends having trouble getting pregnant? I'm 29, like they shouldn't be having trouble. Why are my friends having really scary births? Why are my friends going through all of this to have a baby? And it got my wheels spinning. And it's, some of this is unavoidable, but a lot of this we can work into ourselves. So I just, Josh knows I've been texting in our group chat like, why is
Yeah,
this? I want to start a series on this
Yeah,
because I just think it needs to be talked about a lot more because, again, so much of it is kind of in our control.
yeah.
absolutely.
I would think a healthy 29-year-old woman and a healthy, how old, Alston?
29, oh, 30. He just turned
30,
30.
healthy
Hmm.
30, healthy 29 years old. Like you guys should like bump
It
into each other
shouldn't
at
be an
night and
issue.
get pregnant. Like, so it should be like, you know what? Like you should like rub against each other in the middle of the bed and be like, I'm
Yeah,
pregnant, right? You know what I'm saying? Like
exactly.
it's just seemed
But
like that.
you
Um,
didn't learn how hard it was to get pregnant until you got to our age and you realized how hard it is to actually get pregnant. So, opening the door for that conversation and really just like having things that you can fall back on, things that you can do, a route that you can take. And I love the idea of having multiple different routes, not having to rely on IUI or IVF. If is there something else I can do that's A, way more cost friendly, and B, it doesn't require me to constantly go to a doctor's office and have these potential risks later on.
Yeah. I think it's something we're going to see happen a lot more common too, is we're going to see a
Yeah.
lot more healthy people who look healthy, feel healthy, have no big red flags, have issues with
Hmm.
fertility. And I just feel like they deserve to have options of like where to go, what makes
100%.
what makes the most sense for them.
Yep,
I know
100%.
I know the answer to this, but like, how rewarding is this for you on a personal level? I know it started the journey with your child, right? And I know probably helping children is awesome, right?
Yeah.
Having a kid come in and be like, "Hey, my 7-year-old has eczema everywhere," right?
Hmm.
That's awesome. How rewarding is this for you?
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
I
I am like
know,
a
me too.
very emotional
Me too.
person.
I know. I'm the emotional one. I'm the emotional one, right?
Um,
I've
it's
yeah.
it's incredible. I've had some really awesome experiences, I would say, in the past couple years as we're talking about this more and more. Um, like I wrote my book. I went to a conference last year and I had a woman come up to me after my presentation and say, reading your book, the first few pages was the first time I have ever felt seen in my fertility journey, and I've been struggling for years. And of course, I'm sobbing at this
Yes.
point. And
Yes.
like we just wrapped up care with a woman who has had two stillbirths in the middle of her pregnancy and was just told, it's just bad luck. Just try again. It wasn't just bad luck, right? And she's not pregnant yet, but she's like, for the first time in a long time, one, the care that I received with you guys is better than anything I've ever gotten anywhere else, seeing 1,000,001 doctors to figure out what's happening from like a maternal fetal medicine perspective. And two, I actually feel hopeful to try and conceive again. Like I feel like it might be different this time, even though there's still a lot of fear there. So, like the kid side, like I love seeing kids get better. And even though the fertility side is so much more challenging because we're basically competing with IVF, which is like I'm very small fish when it comes to the IVF machine. So, with that big of a competition of like just trying to get the word out, this is kind of what I consider to be my life's work is if I can make a
Hmm.
small difference for some people, even though I want everybody to know about this, the fact that we see dozens of babies born every year is still incredible in and of itself, and people who would have never had that experience if they hadn't have stumbled upon us.
Do you
Yeah.
only work in person or do you work remote? Meaning, if someone's listening to this and they live in Canada,
Yep. So we actually are a fully virtual practice. I
wonderful.
founded our practice, and we have 7 practitioners on staff who work with clients all over the country. In Canada, we work in UK, we can work in Australia. There's not a whole lot of limits. We can work just about anywhere with people. And the nice thing with being virtual is we can meet you on your schedule wherever you're at.
Wonderful. I think that's great. I think so people that
Hmm.
can, because I do know people personally that have gone through some struggles. So we can take this podcast and be like, hey, you got to get on the phone and
Hmm.
do a Zoom.
Yep.
We're gonna make sure when we share this that people know how to get a hold of you. So as we communicate before this drops, make sure we have email, website, all of that stuff. Links to is your book on Amazon?
It's on
Okay.
Amazon.
Okay. Did you self-publish or someone published for you?
I did self-publish actually.
Wonderful. Yes, we have self-published. That's really hard.
It's hard. It's
I'm
a big
trying to
job.
self. I'm trying to. We're trying to self-publish again. And before I had somebody help us on Kindle. Now we got to do it ourselves. That's a lot. That's really hard. I am finding that is an elephant I'm trying to chew one bite at a time. That's a lot. So congratulations for figuring out Kindle self-publishing. That in itself is just as hard as having a child. Okay.
Yes.
So if you're out there having a baby, learning to self-publish, both difficult. Okay. Um, thank you for coming on. This was absolutely amazing. I'm
Hmm.
very grateful that there's somebody like you out there, right? I think it's awesome you found this niche and you can tie it to a personal. Now, did you have struggles getting pregnant?
I did
No?
not.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. It started with the child and now you're moving into this. Um, very thankful for what you do. I love having options for people that watch our podcast that can be like, oh, it's I don't have to go to the local doctor and it's not IUI or IVF. I have options and I can ask why. And
Hmm.
your health is yes, there are genetic factors you have. Your health is the most controllable thing we have.
Mhm.
We can control our health. And I bet there's a lot of people who, especially women, who maybe haven't been inspired. I don't know if inspired is the word to change their health, but I do think it's people's innate and women's innate desire to have children. I really do. I really do believe that. Um,
Hmm.
I kind of make fun of Gray is when we first met, Gray was not getting married and she was never going to have babies. She was going to live in Australia and travel the world and, probably go to Burning Man or something, right?
Hmm.
And now it's like she's married. We're having a podcast on. I just love it. It's fun to see. I love it, right?
Full circle.
I love it. Full circle. Thank you for
Hmm.
coming on. I hope this message, I can say this, and it's not for myself. I hope this is the most viewed podcast we have. I really do.
Same.
I really do.
Same.
Thank you very much, Deidre. We'll make sure everybody hears this.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Of course.